Good group. Geez, all right. I'd rather you did that at the end. You're a good group. My name is Vince Yo, and I am an alcoholic. Hi. I am glad to be here this morning, safe and sober, and a functioning part of Alcoholics Anonymous, and a participating member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm glad to be in an AA meeting in that capacity. I like to say that, and I like to remember that, because the time was when I was present in many AA meetings, and I was not a sober, functioning, participating member of Alcoholics Anonymous. But that is not true today. Today I am, and I'm safe, and I'm sober, and I'm here with you. And that's where I belong. I would like to thank the people in New York for inviting me here. I'd like to thank Monsignor Dillon. And of course I would be remiss if I didn't thank His Eminence Raymond Cardinal O'Keefe, who I'm sure is ultimately responsible for my being here. I would like to thank Kevin and Joe, who were my hosts, and they treated me to a marvelous dinner and a lovely night at the Larchmont Shore Club. Pretty high rent district for an old drunk, I'll tell you. And it was a lovely evening, and today's a nice day, and I'm glad that I'm here. The people who stood up in their first 90 days of Alcoholics Anonymous, of sobriety, welcome to AA. And I've got some news for you. You're in the right place. As a matter of fact, you don't have anywhere else to go. This is it. This is it. This is the end of the line. There is nowhere else. Not only are you welcome here, but surprisingly, to you I'm sure, we want you here. We are not simply going to tolerate you. We want you. And if you are anything at all like I was when I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous, that's real good news, isn't it? Probably no one wants you much anywhere these days. There are probably some places left that are still tolerating you, but nobody really wants you, except here. And we don't want you in spite of who you are. We want you because of who you are, which is another piece of good news. I've never met you if you're new, but I know some things about you. I know, for example, that this year you've made a series of very bad decisions, haven't you? Right? I know that if you're anything at all like me, down deep in your soul, you are convinced, although you're not telling anybody, that you are not really alcoholic, right? Not really. Maybe a little, but not really. You are not really like us. And if that the truth were really known, your case is different, right? And you probably really don't belong here. Well, I want you to know that if you feel that way, the very fact that you feel that way means that you do belong here. That is the requirement for membership here. That's what you need to have to be fit in here, to be a part of. I know that if you are engaged in that great debate we get into with ourselves when we're new here, am I really alcoholic? The answer is yes. I can help you with that. You are. We don't get mistakes here. The social drinkers in Rye Beach are not hanging out here today, I'll tell you. This is not where they come. People who come here are alcoholic. And so you're in the right place. I guess I'll start out this morning and tell you a little bit about my first AA meeting, since we have a significant number of new people here. And it was a long time ago. It was in November of 1965, and it was in Long Beach, California. And it was in a section of Long Beach, California that is very much like this area. It was a suburb of Los Angeles, a very upscale, upper-middle-class kind of place that had a lot of upper-middle-class tract homes in it. Not the beautiful old homes you have here, but it's California, you know. They were newer homes, but they were tract homes. They were nice homes, but they were new. And it was a very upscale community. All of those homes, I'm sure, were owned by dentists and insurance salesmen, right? That kind of a place. And when they got a drinking problem, they went to the basement of the Presbyterian Church in Los Altos on Friday night. And they were a nice group of people. They looked good, and they sounded good, and they smelled good. And they were all married to pretty blonde Al-Anon women, incidentally. All of them. Who did needlepoint during the AA meeting, you know? None of them looked like an alcoholic. And when I wandered into the basement of that church on that Friday night in November of 1965, and I looked around that room, I couldn't find any alcoholics. And if you were new, if you had nothing to do with AA or alcoholism, and if you didn't know anything about it, if you were just an ordinary human being, and you were to wander into the basement of that church, and someone were to say to you, there are many alcoholics here. Who are they? You wouldn't find any. Nobody looked like an alcoholic. Except one person, me. You'd have picked me out. I looked like an alcoholic. But aside from that, nobody looked like an alcoholic. I had on a torn pair of jeans and a ripped T-shirt. And I had just spent hadn't bathed or shaved in over a week, and I just spent the previous 5 days in the Long Beach City Jail due to a series of unfortunate circumstances that were not my fault. The police department in Long Beach, California happens to be fascist. I don't know if you have those kind of police departments here, but they were fascist, and they had abused my civil rights on a consistent basis. This being the latest. And I like to remember why I was there. And if you're new, I have some more good news for you. I was not in that meeting because I was in search of sobriety or serenity or quiet heart. I like that. Yeah. I tell you why I was there. I had no job, no car, no money, and no place to live. And that was the only place I knew of where I could sit down and not once again get arrested. That's why I was there. So the good news for you, if you're new, is there is no required motivation to be here. We do not grade you on your motivation. If we did, this would be a smaller meeting this morning, I'll tell you that. And you'd have a different speaker. You can go to the bank on that. It does not matter why you're here. It only matters that you are. I sat in the back of the room where most new people sit in AA. You never get too close, do you? I mean, somebody might think that you want to stay here. It implies commitment if you sit up front, right? We don't do that. I didn't do that. I sat in the back. Now, I should tell you from the outset that I am Irish, and I'm Catholic, and I'm from New Jersey. And I have trouble with people from Texas. We don't get along well. The chemistry is bad, or I don't know. We have trouble, Texans and I. And I sat in the back of that room next to a guy who was about 6'5", and he had on cowboy boots and a 10-gallon hat in his lap, and his name was Tex. And Tex was not sober very long himself. He was at the, what I like to call the evangelical stage of sobriety, you know, somewhere about in the middle of his 3rd month. And Tex wanted to hep somebody. And he told me, he said, "Boy, I'm going to hep you." And I remember thinking, you know, why don't you go hep somebody else, Tex? You know, I mean, really, give it a pass, Tex. But Tex wasn't having no for an answer. He hepped me. And the first thing he did is he repeated to me in rapid succession all of the AA cliches. one after another. And they are dreary, aren't they? And if you're here in search of hope, and some jerk from Texas is telling you things like, easy does it. Think, easy does what? And finally he drapes his arm around my shoulder and he says, keep it simple. Yeah. I thought, I'll bet you do, Tex. Tell you that. I have absolutely no question. That was the only thing Tex said that I had no argument with. I was sure that was true. And he put some pamphlets in my lap. And he put the card with the 20 questions on it. I guess you use it here from Johns Hopkins. The people from the medical school down there have decided in their infinite wisdom they can determine how alcoholic we are by the way you answer these 20 questions. Everybody gets a test here, if you're new. I think it's ridiculous, but there's a good reason if you're new to take the test. And the best reason to take the test is it pleases the old-timer who gives you the test, which is really, it's the best reason I know of for taking it. And there are 20 questions, and the key is if you don't want to belong here, you must find a way to answer no to these questions. Because the more yes answers you have, as you go down the column, the more alcoholic you get. As you go down the list, the criteria is if you answer one question yes, there is a possibility that you have a problem with alcohol. If you answer 2 questions yes, you do have a problem with alcohol. If you answer 3 questions yes, you have it. You're an alcoholic. I answered 19 yes. I answered no to the question, do you seek lower companions? I couldn't find any. So I took the test for Tex. And the meeting began. And it began in the manner most meetings begin in Southern California. I said, I'm sure here. They read that portion of our recovery program in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, How It Works. And they read the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know about you, but I didn't hear anything new. Is there anything really new there to you? I'm the end product of Dominican nuns and Jesuit priests. What is new there? Is there anything new about that ethic? I know all about these principles. And you A&A, you talk about them like you invented them. Well, I've got big news for you. You didn't. I know all about them. Searching and fearless moral inventory. What the hell is that, a new idea? Where I come from, we call it examination of conscience. I'm familiar with that principle. Admitting to God and to another human being the exact nature of your wrongs. Let me tell you, every Saturday afternoon, from the time I am 7, probably through the time I'm 16. What the hell does that have to do with not drinking? So I guess on a subconscious level, I dismissed those steps when I heard them read. I said what maybe you are saying tonight, this morning. My case is different. I am not really like them because if that's what they need, what I know about that is it doesn't work for me. It does not work for me. So I guess I won't take them because I've done it and it never has changed my life. Now, I didn't reason all of that out sitting in the back of the basement of that Presbyterian church. It wasn't a conscious decision, but I'm sure on a subconscious level, that's what I did. And the meeting began. And it was a good meeting. It was a participation meeting, and they called several people up to the podium to share. Insurance salesmen and dentists, I suppose. And they were nice people, and they said innocuous things that were inapplicable to my life, that had nothing to do with me. I mean, one guy in particular said 6 months prior to that evening why he blew the mortgage payment on his house. And he found you splendid people and this wonderful program. And his little blonde wife sat in the front row and nodded yes. And it was just wonderful that they were there. I turned to Tex. I said, where do you send the more difficult cases? And he said, shut up. Or something equally as, with typical Texan polish, you know. The meeting continued. And if I had any doubts as to whether I belonged there or not, they were cured at the conclusion of that meeting, because they had there then, I suppose you have it here, they had, you call them anniversaries, we call them birthdays. They had birthday celebrations, which is really cakes with candles on them for some moron who happened to go a year without taking a drink. And these middle-aged people, I mean, it was embarrassing. Isn't it embarrassing? Doesn't it really? Doesn't it smack of a mental institution? I mean, it really is a, you know, doesn't it? It really reminds you of something you would do right after dance therapy. You know what I mean? Right before you go down to work on your wallet, you know. I mean, a room full of 400 middle-aged people and a cake with, I mean, and they had a number of these imbecilic birthday parties this evening. One in particular was for a gal who was about 110, and she was sober forever. They had a bonfire on top of this cake, and this goddamn candle lit up the skyline on top of this cake. And she went over to that cake and huffed and puffed, and it really appeared as though the pulmonary disease would kill her first, I'll tell you. She got the candles out, and she got up here, and she said her name was Phoebe, and she was an alcoholic. And then she said something about, did I want what she had? Well, I'm going to tell you, you would take a very long look at Phoebe. And it is true that my standards were not high that night, I'll tell you. But I'll tell you what I decided to do. I thought I'd pass. Yeah. Now, I suppose it's safe to say that I did not have a spiritual awakening at that meeting, didn't it? But I'm going to tell you what I did. It may be the only significant thing I have to say in AA. And if you're new, I'd like you to understand that for the following 3½ years, I drank no alcohol. I used no mood-altering chemicals whatsoever, and I stayed right smack in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous. I did everything there was to do in AA. I participated in Alcoholics Anonymous in every facet and any way that you can participate in AA. I was active in my home group. I folded chairs and washed cups. We used to have cups you washed in those days. I used to, I did everything. I joined committees. I was a general service representative. I was an intergroup representative. I was on the institutional committee. I was on the convention committee. I went out and made talks. I did everything that you do in AA except one thing. I did not take these steps. As a result, my alcoholism got worse. And it got worse while I was in AA meetings nightly. And if you have not taken these steps yet, yours is getting worse. Understand that. Recovery from alcoholism is achieved by taking these 12 steps, 1 through 12. You must take them. They are mandatory. They are not suggested. They are required. You have to take them. If you take them, you get better. If you don't take them, you get worse. And you get worse while you sit in the middle of AA meetings. So if you are new or relatively new, and you are with a crowd of people who is giving you what's in vogue today in AA to say, which is a lot of hot gas about just bring the body and the mind will follow, get away from them. Because it's not true. You must do a hell of a lot more than that. You must take these 12 steps. You must execute them. They are all about action. They require action. They are not, it does not matter if you think about them, evaluate them, massage them. Your opinion about them is irrelevant. If you're new, nobody cares what you think. What you think is worthless. What you think brought you here. That's what it's done for you. You must take them. It does not matter whether you believe in God. That is irrelevant. Nobody cares whether you believe in God. What you should know is that God believes in you. You must take the steps. If you don't do them, you get worse. Now, I did not take them, and I got worse over a 3.5-year period of time, and I sat in the middle of AA, and you know what? I knew I was getting worse. It was clear that I was getting worse. And that's the great thing about AA. There are winners and losers in Alcoholics Anonymous, and you don't need no one has to tell you who's who here, do they? Everybody knows who's who. People who get better here are visually perceptible. You can see recovery here, and can't you? You can watch people get better here. With the naked eye, you can see recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous. People who recover here are different from me. People who recover here, something happens to them. Something happens in their eyes. They get a sense of purpose about their life. They are going somewhere. They have direction. They have purpose, direction, and their conversation is filled with things that make me crazy. They talk about, and obviously sincerely mean, they talk about a relationship with a higher power. They actually write that inventory. They write it. They talk about paying the money back. You know, really paying the money back. And then they do it. They pay the money back. They talk about and really do help others for fun and for free with no price tag. Just help them with no price tag. And something happens to them. And I watch it happen to people who come in here long after I've been here. And I sit in the back of AA meetings and I think to myself, when does that happen to me? When do I get mine? When does it happen to me? I used to think they had secret AA meetings somewhere, you know what I mean, where they gave you the real key. And it could not possibly be this. And that's the way that I lived in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, my life on the outside looked good. Good things happened to me. I was 24 years old. I mean, if you're 24 and you come here, your life's going to look good in a hurry. It really will. You can't stay down if you're 24. I mean, great things will happen to you on the outside. I mean, your life will come together. I have a good education. I have a spectacular medical education that I received in the United States Navy. I went in the Navy and, yeah, they gave me tests, aptitude tests. You want to know what I do in life well? I take written tests well. I really do. That's the best thing about me is the way that I take written tests. I am very good at written tests. I am very poor at living life. But I'm excellent at tests. If life was a written test, I'd not be here today. Okay. I get A's on written tests. And they gave me aptitude tests in the Navy. And they said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be a physician. I'd like to go. The closest we can get you to that, they said, we can send you to hospital corps school. We can make you a hospital corpsman, whatever that was. And I said, it sounds good to me. So they sent me to hospital corps school in Great Lakes, Illinois, in the Navy. And I graduated #1 in the class. So I'm a good student. It's a controlled environment. You stay there all day and all night. So I'm a star when my environment is controlled. So I graduated #1. And they said to me, we want to send you to a more advanced school. It's called Independent Duty School, where we train hospital corpsmen to go on destroyers where there's no physicians. And it's and you are the physician, essentially, on the ship. And I said, well, yes, I'd love to go to that school. So I went to that school. And I graduated #1 in that class. And they said, we want to send you to another school. We want to make you a medical administrator. And so I went to that school. And I graduated #1 in that class. And I was in the Navy 4.5 years, and all I did was go to school. And I have this great medical education. And I got out of the Navy. When I ended up in this AA meeting in 1965, a new profession had opened up in civilian medicine. It was called the Physician's Associate, or Physician's Assistant Program. And what they did is they took people like me who had this unique medical education in the service, and they integrated us into civilian medicine, and they licensed us to go into emergency rooms and essentially practice primary medicine in those emergency rooms, primary care medicine. We were essentially, in many emergency rooms in California and throughout the country, we were the primary physicians in big, large emergency rooms that saw a lot of trauma. I became the third licensed PA in the state of California in 1966, and I got the very best job a PA could get in California in 1966. I went to work in an industrial emergency room down in the Los Angeles Industrial Complex, and I worked nights. And what this emergency room, the kind of medicine that we practiced, is we saw industrial trauma, all of the accidents that happened in the, people like Kaiser Steel and Norris Industries. They would have accidents, and they would bring them all into this emergency room. So we saw a lot of surgical trauma in this emergency room. And I was the night PA in that emergency room, and it was a very busy place, and I was very good at what I did. I was well trained, and I enjoyed the practice of that kind of medicine. And I liked it, and they liked me, and they paid me very well. It was rewarding monetarily, it was rewarding emotionally, it was rewarding psychologically, it was even rewarding spiritually. I was educated to do this. I enjoyed it. It was a wonderful, marvelous thing. I was in on the ground floor of a brand new profession, and I had the world right here. I had newfound sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. I met a girl. Everybody meets a girl. A beautiful girl. She was the daughter of a longtime sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we fell in love, and we got married. And everybody said, what a great young couple they are. They have everything going for them. I mean, he's sober in AA. He's in a new profession. He has a great job. She's beautiful. She's an Al-Anon. I mean, boy, they've got it. They've got it all. Aren't they a great young couple? I mean, wonderful things are going to happen to them. Well, let me tell you about it. Didn't turn out that way. Because a funny thing happened to me in that emergency room. I worked nights, 12 and sometimes 14 hours a night. And I had not taken these steps. And I had no AA program. I had no spiritual program at all in my life. But what I did have is an excellent medical education. And I know how to take care of depression. And I had a lot of depression. I had feelings that you and I know about. Feelings of inadequacy. Feelings of not being up to the task. Feelings of not really feeling like a man. You know what I mean? Feelings of overwhelming. Have you ever been lonely, overwhelmingly lonely in a room full of people that loved you? You and I know that feeling, don't we? All of the kinds of things that you feel with untreated alcoholism, without alcohol. And I would feel these things in that emergency room. I knew I was over my head, that I wasn't quite up to the task. And I'd get terribly depressed. So I began to treat that depression. I used Dexedrine. 15 milligram Spanchules. And before I was through, I was taking 8 or 9 of them a day. Now, anyone here familiar with amphetamine abuse will understand. That has you moving right along. That's what that does. I'll tell you that. Whatever you're doing, you will do it in a hurry. Let me tell you that. But the problem with that is that along about the 4th or 5th day, when you've not slept nor eaten, your hair stands right on end like that, I'll tell you, boy, and your eyes dilate out like that. And when you show up in the emergency room to help the sick, doesn't look good. The guy you're going to relieve never wants to go home. You know what I mean? And that's what happened to me. But there's an answer to that. And the answer to that is a drug called Demerol. Demerol, incidentally, is a narcotic. I have to add this because I think it's important in AA to talk about this today. I'll give you my pharmacology talk here. Narcotics, incidentally, there's a difference between, there are 2 different kinds of addiction. Narcotic addiction and alcoholism are different kinds of addiction. I know that many of you don't want to hear that, but it's true. It's a different ballgame here. And it's true. Narcotics are addictive for everybody. They come from opium. They are a family of drugs like heroin and morphine and Dilaudid and Demerol. They are narcotics. Demerol is actually a synthetic, but it's the same analog. They are addictive for everybody that uses them. You don't need an addictive personality to get addicted to heroin. You need a syringe and a needle. Everybody gets addicted to narcotics. Do you know that 9 out of 10 people drink alcohol with impunity? They are not alcoholic. They never end up at Unity Day breakfasts in Rye Beach. They are what is known as social drinkers. And they are not like us. They don't drink alcohol like us. Social drinkers are, I don't understand them, but they are not like us. Social drinkers do things that are, you know what a social drinker does? I'll tell you, I'll describe it. A social drinker says things like, gee, no more for me, I'm starting to feel it, you know? Andy? That's what a social drinker says. Or a social drinker says, I'd love to, but I can't have another. My wife is waiting dinner and I got to get home, you know. And they go home. Or my personal favorite. How about this? Let's eat. Huh? That's what social drinkers do. Now, I'm not one of them, and I assume none of you are either. But it's different. Most people are like that. That's what happens to most people who drink alcohol. 9 out of 10 people that drink alcohol, that's the way they drink alcohol. Now, we don't like to talk about that in AA. We like to label everybody here. We sit and we watch people drink. You know, he belongs here, you know. But that's not true, usually. It's not true. As, you know, bitterly disappointing as that is, not everybody belongs in AA. It never occurs to them to come to AA either, incidentally. They never say to themselves, I got to get that judge off my back and go to AA. You know? That's what we say. That's not what they say. Many of us here are both, incidentally. I am both, or I wouldn't be here. Primarily, I'm an alcoholic. All of this happened to me after I came to AA. I mean, I didn't know anything about drugs until I got here, and I learned about them in AA. But I began to inject Demerol intravenously in that emergency room. And what happened to me is what happens to everybody who injects a drug like Demerol intravenously. I became addicted. I mean, you just do. And the problem with that is, there are many problems with that. The primary, first and foremost problem with that is, drugs like Demerol have another connotation to them. They are called what is known as controlled substances. Let me tell you what that means. That means people care about what happens to Demerol. You know, I mean, really, people get obsessed with where the hell the Demerol is. I mean, really, boy. You have human beings whose entire lives is dedicated to measuring cc's in a Demerol vial, boy. And they get uptight when the dope is gone out of the drawer. You know. And on my shift, it was always gone. People like pharmacists, hospital pharmacists, are very concerned about Demerol. People like the administrator of the hospital has always got a whole lot of questions at the end of the shift. This can't go on, Vince. Where the hell is the Demerol going? You know, I mean, they would really. And I'll tell you about the people who care the most. They are the good folks on the California State Narcotics Board. They care more than we care, let me tell you. And they came into that emergency room one night and inspected the narcotics logs and all of the narcotics, and they placed me under arrest. And they charged me with a felony, appropriating narcotics for my own use. And they took me out of that emergency room directly to the Los Angeles County Jail, dressed in my little green scrub suit. Away we went, I'll tell you. And they booked me into that jail. I didn't have to stay there, but they had to have a booking procedure because they had charged me with a felony. They released me, and the next morning I had to appear before a judge in the Superior Court charged with appropriating narcotics for my own use. Now, the charge was subsequently reduced to a misdemeanor. I did not have to go to jail, but they revoked my medical license, as well they should. and I became unemployable. And the long and short of it is, and I'm going to cut this short because I want to talk about some recovery this morning, is that this girl and I, the young lady that I married, she and I ended up spending the summer of 1972 living in an apartment by the airport in Englewood, California. And July and August of 1972, I drank 1/2 gallon of vodka a day, and she watched. And all of the things that happen to you when you drink 1/2 gallon of vodka a day happened to me. And I would assume that most everyone in this room knows about that kind of drinking. And the things that happen to you when you drink 1/2 gallon of vodka a day are axiomatic. They happen to everybody, don't they? That's another case where you don't have to worry about addictive personality, do you? Nobody who drinks 1/2 gallon of vodka a day worries about diagnosis. You drink 1/2 gallon of vodka a day, I'll tell you what happened to me. And like a good Al-Anon, she watched very closely. And I would, well, I'll tell you what, I was never asleep, I was never awake, I was never drunk, and I was never sober. I lived in a twilight zone that you and I know about. But if you've never been there, you can't possibly describe it, can you? If you look at a clock and it says 7 o'clock, it could be 7 a.m., could be 7 p.m., right? You have no way of knowing, because you have no concept of where you are or what time it is or what day it is, and all you know is you're sick. The only constant is that you are sick. You are sick deep inside of your soul. You are sick in your stomach, you're sick in your heart, you're sick in your head, and you're sick in your soul. And that's the way that you live. I lost 35 pounds in July and August of 1972. Finally, in the beginning of September, her family came, and they got her, and they took her out of that apartment. They took the furniture and the car and all of the things that go with an apartment. The only thing they left was me. And some money. I don't know how, my clothes. And I got over to that liquor store, I guess 3 or 4 more days. I don't know how many days. And I got that 1/2 gallon of vodka, and I brought it back, and I drank it. And I was in and out of blackouts all the time. I didn't know what was real and what wasn't. I didn't know when I was in one or out of one, quite frankly. I was always blacking out, and I would come to in bizarre places, places I had no knowledge of how I had gotten there. And I came out of a blackout in Newport Beach, California, which is about 50 miles away down the freeway. And it was, I'll tell you what it was. It was in mid-September of 1972, and the temperature was about 110, and I had on a 3-piece wool suit and a white shirt and a tie. And I was sitting on a bench on the Balboa Peninsula going through the Orange County newspaper, the classified ads, because I needed a job. And I had a suitcase next to me with some clothes I'd obviously packed. That's how I became cognizant of where I was. And I looked through I found a job that day, too, as a matter of fact. I found a job as an apprentice embalmer for a mortician in Costa Mesa. That's all I could do. My license was gone. That was, and it was a dreadful job. If you're new, don't do that. It's not a good choice. And it was a god-awful job. It paid $85 a week. And the fringe benefit was an apartment over the casket room. And God, have you ever walked through the casket room in the morning with a hangover? It will set you free, boy, I'll tell you that. God-awful. And the mortician was a ghoul. He walked, he was crippled, he drug his right leg, Christ, it was just like something out of Edgar Allan Poe. And I didn't like him, and he didn't like me. And the long and short of it was, we had a fight, I got drunk, and I stole his hearse. And on September the 20th, 1972, I came out of yet one more blackout, driving the wrong way on Pacific Coast Highway in Newport Beach in a stolen hearse with a young lady next to me who I did not recall meeting, who was screaming hysterically. And I remember thinking, if I have an overriding problem in my life, if I have one real serious character flaw, you know what that is? I am predisposed to become involved with neurotic women. You identify with that, don't you? Yeah. And I told her that, too. I said, I'm going to tell you something. You are really unstable. Because you are overreacting. Christ, You really are giving this a whole lot more energy than it deserves, for Christ's sake. Because she continued to scream. Even when I got that thing going in the right direction, she was still screaming. That was September the 20th, 1972. Now, I hope she got home all right. But I haven't seen her since. But I can tell you this. From that date to this, it's been unnecessary for me to have any alcohol or use any mood-altering chemical whatsoever. And that's, well, first of all, it's very good news if you're me. But secondly, and more importantly, it's not, what's amazing about that, and if you're new, it was not my plan. I didn't plan to quit drinking on September the 20th, sitting in that hearse on the side of the road on Pacific Coast Highway in Newport Beach. I didn't have any idea that was going to be my last drink for 16 and a half years. It wasn't my intention. If you would have materialized in the back of that hearse and you would have foretold my future, it would have been amazing. But you would have told me, first of all, you're going back to AA, kid. Tomorrow morning, you're going back to AA. And for the next 16 and a half years, you're not going to have anything to drink. You're not going to use any mood-altering chemicals. But more than that, something is going to happen to you that is absolutely amazing. You are going to become desperate. So desperate over a sustained period of time that your experience in Alcoholics Anonymous is going to be completely different. Because of that desperation, you are going to be motivated to take a series of actions that seemingly have nothing to do with what you perceive to be wrong with you. And as a result of those actions, you're going to get a measure of recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I would not have, I wouldn't have been able to accept all of that on September the 20th, 1972, but I took the guy's hearse back to him, and he was upset. He was in the apartment over the casket room throwing my clothes out the window is what he was doing. All of a sudden, it was 6 a.m. and the sun was coming up, and it was one of those great California sunrises. I'll tell you, if you haven't seen it, there's nothing like it. It was a beautiful California day, and everything I owned was strewn all over the blacktop of this parking lot in this mortuary. I had no job, no car, no money, and no place to live. I don't know about you, but every time I get in that kind of shape, I go to AA. I put everything I owned in a cardboard box, and I went to the Costa Mesa Alano Club, which incidentally, that's all there was in 1972. There were no treatment centers or detoxes or care units, and if there were, I would have imagined they would have looked at me and said, you can't possibly be an alcoholic. You don't have any medical insurance. You know. All there was the Costa Mesa Alano Club, and it wasn't much. It was a dreary, dreadful Alano Club. And I walked in there with a cardboard box, and I sat it down, and I sat at the coffee bar, and I had a cup of coffee, and they had an AA meeting there that noon, and I sat in that AA meeting, and I suppose it would be dramatic if I could tell you that I had a spiritual awakening or something wonderful happened to me, that God touched me, or I saw a flash of light, or I discovered some insightful thing that made me not true. You know what it was? A noontime Alano Club AA meeting. They are grim. You been to many of them lately? A long Formica top table with the same 7 Texans I'd left sitting around it, clutching a coffee cup, telling each other how wonderful it was. They put the plug in the jug, you know. It was god-awful is what it was. And I went back outside, and there was another AA meeting there that night, worse than the noontime meeting, worse. Dreadful. God, repeating, repetitive, Pavlovian, cliched crap that I couldn't stand then, and I can't stand it now. Do you know what I mean? I mean garbage. Ridiculous, absolutely low-level morons. The manager of the club let me sleep on the sofa. I had nowhere else to go. The next day I got up and there was some women in that club and we got in a gin rummy game. I won $25. I rented a room on Federal Avenue in Costa Mesa for $11 a week that day. And if you would like to, imagine for a moment with that, if you want to know what that room was like, use your imagination. You'll be correct. $11 a week rooms are all pretty much uniform, aren't they? They're not much different. They're hovels. It was a god-awful place. It was a terrible place. And when I moved into that room, I thought, my God, I'm clearly going to have to stay here a couple of weeks till I can figure something out. I don't think I can live here that long. I've never lived in a place like, I don't think I can stay here that long. It is that bad. I can't stay here for 3 or 4 weeks, and it's going to take me that long to get something going. What am I going to do? Well, 2 years later, when I moved out of that room, didn't look that bad. Funny thing how your perspective changes here, isn't it? I spent what is probably undoubtedly the most significant 2 years of my life living in Orange County, California, sober and Alcoholics Anonymous. And what's important about that, if you're new, is I didn't realize how significant those 2 years were until they were long past. If you would have asked me at any time during that 2-year period of time, how is your life? I would have said, my God, I want to kill myself. My first 2 years of sobriety were abominable. I was virtually unemployable. My medical license was gone. I had nobody left, no family, nobody at all that was interested in whether I survived another day, or so it seemed to me. I got and lost a series of jobs during that 2-year period of time that are unspeakable. I lost a job as a gas station attendant for being incompetent. Fired by a guy from Texas. I lost a job. You know what I did? One Saturday morning, there were all these cars in there. I'm pumping gas. And I was trying to be a good gas station attendant, too, understand? And I locked the wrong gas caps. Everyone left with a key that did not fit the gas cap on their car. You know what I mean? The wrong gas caps were on the wrong cars, and the key. They got upset, and they came back, and I lost a job as a drill press operator, $1.87 an hour drill press operator in a machine shop in Costa Mesa. I mean, you know how hard it is to be a bad drill press operator? You really, this machine shop was a big stone building, looked like something out of Charles Dickens. It was, they had a long rows of drill presses. You know what you did? You went in the morning at 6:15 and you sat on a stool. And they wheeled up a cart with all of these copper plates in it. And the copper plates were all embossed in the middle. And you picked up a copper plate and you put it under the drill and you pulled the handle. And the drill put a hole in the copper plate. You then took the copper plate and you put it in this bucket over here. That was it. That's the job. Difficult to do that wrong. I managed to put the hole in the wrong place on about 1,000 of these copper plates one day, and the foreman of that shop came up and said to me, and he was from right outside of Dallas. He said, and I'll never forget what he said, that Texas, that southwestern, son, we got to let you go, son. You're trying real hard. You're not quite bright enough to do this kind of work, And I remember looking at that jerk thinking, I graduated from a major university, you moron. And that's typical Texas. You never can get them. They looked me right in the eye and said, well, I'll tell you what, boy, you ought to go back and take the course in drill press operator. You know what I mean? And he was right. And I left that machine shop. And that was in February of 1973, and it was pouring rain. And I walked back to this dreary $11 a week room, and I got soaking wet. And I had bronchitis, and I was coughing, and I had no money. And I walked into that room, and I looked at that naked light bulb hanging down from the ceiling. I thought, my God, this is awful. This is dreadful. How did this happen to me? How could this have possibly happened to my life? And that night was a big speaker meeting that we have in Newport Beach, down on the Balboa Peninsula. It was just a wonderful AA meeting. It was probably 400 or 500 people every Thursday night, and they were up, and they were lively, and they were interested, and they were vibrant, and they tried to help me. They were kind to me. They accepted me. And I would go down to this meeting, but I would get depressed because they would all tie their yachts up outside, and they'd come into this meeting. God, talking about feeling like you don't fit. And it was just
And this night in particular, it was just more than I could take. It was a great speaker that night. I'll never forget him. There's some old-timers here that remember this guy. Norm Alfie was his name. Stephanie remembers him for sure. And he was probably the quintessential AA speaker. This guy was magnificent. You know what he did? All he did was he got up every place he talked, he just told a story. A simple AA story. And if you heard him once or twice, you could give his talk verbatim while he was giving it. But it was never boring. Every time you heard him, it was like hearing him for the first time, because you lived his life with him. He had that capacity. And he was the speaker that night. And I sat through Norm's talk, and he didn't inspire me. Nothing made any sense to me. I had no hope. And I went back to this $11 a week room after the meeting. Somebody gave me a ride back, and I remember walking into the room. And I suppose at that moment, I was consumed with more despair than I ever dreamed imaginable. My life was over as nearly as I could tell. I was 31 years old. I was virtually unemployable. I mean, if you can't make a living as a drill press operator, if you can't function as a gas station attendant, they put you in places they call custodial care places. You know what I mean? That's what they do with 31-year-old young men who can't make it on the street. And it seemed to me that was a clear and present reality in 1973. And I was so desperate that night, so consumed with despair, that I did something stupid. So stupid. I can't believe I ever did it. I was so desperate. I was moved to do something I knew would not work. But in abject frustration, I found myself on my knees beside the bed in that crummy $11 a week room. And I said a prayer. It wasn't sophisticated. It was a very simple prayer. God, please help me, because I'm afraid and I'm alone and I can't make it anymore. My recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous began that night. And if you are new and you don't know where to start here, that's where you start. Start there. And the great thing about that is it is not necessary that you believe in that God or have any faith in that prayer. The only thing required of you here is that you are willing to take the action. AA is a program of action. Now, I said that prayer, I didn't get any help. I'm here tonight by accident. You know. I mean, I didn't get the kind of help I thought I needed. I got up the next day and it was, back to the Alano Club. Wasn't what I had in mind, I'll tell you that. And there was a guy in that Alano Club who was sober about 11 years. He was also from Texas, incidentally. His name was Clarence. Clarence was an interesting guy. Clarence was a one-man operation in the floor covering business. What he did is he went and he sold people floor covering jobs, and as soon as he sold one, he ran down and he bought the floor covering and he ran back and installed it. You know what I mean? And Clarence said to me, "How would you like to go to work for me? I'm expanding my firm." He said, "You can be my gopher." He said, "I know you don't have any talent or mechanical skills, but I'll hire you as my gopher. You can carry the tools and help carry the tile, help carry the carpet." He says, "I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll pay you $10 a day, and I will provide your meals." Sounded like the presidency of General Motors to me. I mean, I said, "You got a deal, Clarence." I worked for Clarence for 18 months as his gopher. I carried the tools, went for the coffee, carried the tile, and Clarence provided my meals and paid me $10 a day. I was a millionaire. My overhead was low. My rent was $11 a week. What the hell? I was rolling. As time went by, I even acquired some material possessions. I got a 1964 red Chevrolet convertible with no brakes and a hole in the top. And on Thursday night, I'd pull that car into the parking lot of the Newport Beach speaker meeting. And everybody, when they saw me coming, would get in their Mercedes and put them on the other side of the lot right now. They were always asking me questions about that car, like things like, "Do you have insurance on that car?" You know what I mean? That was a big question. Hell, I hadn't had a driver's license in 3.5 years. Why the hell would I have insurance? You know, redundancy. That's the way that I lived. And time went by. Pretty soon, my second birthday came in Alcoholics Anonymous. And my AA program consisted of this prayer. But I had added something. All it was a prayer. Every night, God help me. Please help me. And I survived. And one day, about 4 months after I first said that prayer, on that night that I spoke of a moment ago, something happened to me that was most strange. I found myself, after Clarence and I were through for the day, it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon in Newport Beach in the summer, which is a beautiful, beautiful place. The sun was setting in the California sky, and I had about $8 in my pocket, and I was on Balboa Island in Newport Beach. And I was walking down the street, and I bought a frozen banana off a stand, and I was eating that frozen banana, and something occurred to me. I felt very, very good. I felt better than I'd ever felt in my life. And when I realized that, I thought, boy, something's really wrong, you know. I mean, I'm going nuts. Why the hell should I feel good? I mean, you know, if you had my life, that's insane to feel good. What in the hell is going on with me? And it occurred to me that the reason I felt good is I knew down deep inside where I lived that I didn't have to drink and I didn't have to use any drugs. And that somehow, some way, I was going to be okay. And I started to add something to that prayer. I started to say, thank you. Thanks a lot, because I'm okay. And by my standards, you know, I wasn't okay. I mean, I was not living up to my potential, you know, whatever the hell that is. But that's the way that I lived. And pretty soon my second birthday had come in AA. I was 2 years sober. And I knew I needed a sponsor. Now, I don't recommend you wait that long. But I'll tell you why I waited that long. Because for a long time, I knew who the sponsor had to be. You know what I mean? And I fought this with every fiber of my being. Because I did not like this guy. I mean, I didn't like him more than a little bit. I couldn't stand him. He appalled me. He was pompous and arrogant. He was, if you looked up arrogant in the dictionary, they'd show you a picture of this jerk. You know what I mean? He was self-serving, and he was egomaniacal. But I'll tell you something about him that was undeniable. He had an apparent, amazing capacity for helping losers in Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, this guy had some talent with helping hopeless cases. You know, I mean, real down and out losers. People who burned out other groups. Everybody has them, you know. The guy who, when you see him come in the meeting, you say, oh, not that jerk. I mean, you know, maybe he's sober, but Christ, go away. You know. These kind of guys would go to this man. He'd be their sponsor. And they would, I mean, they'd get better. I mean, they'd join his fascist AA group on the west side of Los Angeles. And they would do things that were seemingly unrelated to AA, that near as I could tell. I mean, they didn't have anything to do with AA, but they would get better. We would see them. They'd turn up in Orange County, and they would be recovered. One guy in particular, I'll never forget him. Manchester Red, the biker. Okay? Let me tell you about Red. Red was probably the most despicable human being I had ever met. I mean, Red had no redeeming social value. You know, Red was, I mean, he was never sober. He was filthy. I mean, he wore tank tops in December, you know, and he's covered in tattoos, and he had a matted, filthy red beard, and all of his teeth kicked in. And he would come to meetings with a bottle of Canadian Club in his pocket, you know, and he'd pull it out and drink and say, I dare you to stop me, you know, that kind of, Jesus Christ. You know, when you saw Red in an AA meeting, you thought, oh no, he wanted to kill people. He was always talking about, I'm going to kill you, you know, and he meant it, you know, I mean, you knew he'd do it. Well, Red dropped out of sight, and word was he got this guy for a sponsor, and we didn't see him anymore. And about 8 months later, I was sitting in a meeting in Newport Beach, and somebody said, hey, there's Red. And I looked in the back of the room, and I couldn't see Red. I said, yeah, there he is. And there was Red, except he was different. The beard was gone. He'd had all his dental work done. His hair was trimmed. He was in a navy blue blazer and gray slacks and penny loafers. True story. Sitting in the back of the room like a gentleman. And somebody called on him to share. They called him up to the podium. And Red calmly walked up to the podium, introduced himself, identified himself as an alcoholic, and announced to one and all that 6 months prior to that day, he'd made his first child support payment in 10 years. And that he'd had a job, he was working, and next month he was going to vote in the presidential election. For the Republican, too. Now that pushed me over the edge, let me tell you. That did it for me. So I decided to call this guy and ask him if he would help me. So I called him up. Now, he asked me to come up and have lunch with him. He ran a mission on Skid Row in Los Angeles. He was the director of this mission, and he said, you come on up, we'll have lunch and we'll talk about it. So I drove this beat-up old Chevrolet up to the Midnight Mission on Skid Row in Los Angeles, and I went in and had lunch with this guy. And I asked him to help me. And I'll never forget what he said, because it's the most significant thing I have ever heard in Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you're new, or relatively new, I hope that you are fortunate enough to have somebody say something like this to you someday. He said, yes, I will be willing to help you on one condition. And that is, you must be able to accept the simple proposition that your very best judgment about your life is terrible. And that my judgment about what you ought to do about your life is infinitely better than yours. Now, he didn't say his judgment about his life. He said his judgment about my life. He said, if you will accept that proposition, and if you will agree to do what I suggest that you do without debate, no debate, I'm not going to argue with you. If you will agree to do that, I'll help you. Well, I am here to tell you that I was just desperate enough to make that unholy pact with the devil. I agreed to do what this guy said. And the first thing he told me is he looked out the window and he saw this car. And somehow they always know. You know what he said to me? Do you have insurance on that car? You know? They always know, don't they? I mean, that's prejudice, isn't it? It's discrimination. I mean, just because a guy has an old beat-up car and he's new in AA, that does not mean it's uninsured, does it? Yes, it does. Yeah. And he said, do you have a driver's license? And I said, no. He said, simple. Our first act is going to be you give me the keys to that car. I said, wait a minute. Wait a minute. That's my car. Why should I give you the keys? He said the second profound thing to me that I'd ever heard in AA. He said, I'll tell you very simply why you should give me the keys. Because law-abiding citizens, such as myself, have a right, a God-given and civil right, to drive on the city streets safe from morons like you. I gave him the keys, you know. How do you argue with that? And he said, I'm going to take this car and park it up by my house in Venice, out by the beach. And I'm going to keep the keys. And you will eventually get a job and make some money, and you'll be able to get a driver's license and insurance. And when you do, I'm going to give you the keys back, and you'll have a car. But until then, the car stays parked in front of my house. And he said, and aside from that, I want you to move into this mission and live here. I said, whoa, wait a minute. You don't understand. I'm looking for upward mobility. You know. And he said, I'll tell you what I want to do. I want you to move in this mission and not only live here, but I have an assignment for you. Every day, when you get up in the morning, you take a shower and you put on that 3-piece pinstripe suit you have, and you come down here to my office, and I'm going to give you an allowance, $8 a day. And I want you to take that $8 and go outside and get on the 83 bus that runs up Wilshire Boulevard. And between downtown Los Angeles and the San Fernando Valley, I want you to get a series of transfers from the bus driver along the way, and I want you to get off periodically every time you pass a hospital or medical facility. I want you to go inside, talk with the administrators, and tell them that you are sober 2 years in Alcoholics Anonymous, you don't use drugs, and you don't drink alcohol, and you need help. You need help getting your medical license back, and you need a job. I said, that's preposterous. I mean, isn't that ridiculous? Have you ever heard of anything so stupid in your life? I mean, I said, you might be big in missions, pal, but you don't know anything about the medical profession. I mean, that's ridiculous. But the funny thing, I didn't have a choice. So I did what he said. And I went down every morning and I put on my suit and I got the $8. And I'm here to tell you, I did precisely what this man asked me to do. For 8 months, I lived in the Midnight Mission on Skid Row in Los Angeles, and I did what he told me to do. And every Saturday in my group, we meet at this guy's house and we play softball across the street. So every Saturday morning, I got to visit my car. And it occurred to me that my recovery was taking a little longer than we would have liked. I mean, 8 months living in a mission. And I would see my car every Saturday. But unfortunately, I don't know if you're familiar with Venice, California, but if you park a car in Venice, California, it is at your peril. So what I did over an 8-month period of time is I watched my car decompose in front of this guy's house. And it was very symbolic of my life, this car. This car was rotting away, much like my life was rotting away in this mission, or so it seemed to me. I mean, I'd go up there one Saturday morning and one of the wheels would be missing off the car. You know what I mean? It'd be kind of sitting on 3 wheels. A couple weeks later, I'd go up there and the whole top was gutted. A convertible with a ripped off top. And then one day I went up and the entire steering column is gone. Why the hell anybody would want that? It was gone. Then one Saturday I went up there to play ball, and the final insult. There was nothing left but a big oil spot. Precisely like my life. That's what it was like. And so I lived in the Midnight Mission. And I rode the 83 bus up Wilshire Boulevard. And at the end of the day, I would end up in West Los Angeles. I would go to one of my group meetings, and I would take the bus back down to where I lived in the Mission. And he told me, he said, make sure at the end of the day you end up in West LA and you go to one of our meetings. And when it's time to go home, take the bus. Don't let anybody drive you. Because they have to get up and go to work in the morning. You're a loser. Kind man, wasn't he? He says, you can ride the bus. You don't have a job. And that's the way that I lived. And one Friday morning in May of 1975, I went out of that mission with my 3-piece suit, my $8, and the sun was out. And I was 2 years and 8 months sober, and I lived in a mission on Skid Row. I had no job, no car, no money. I was doing worse than anyone I had ever met in AA. My entire AA program consisted of this simple, myopic prayer that I said, and I was saying thank you now, not remembering why the hell I was thanking anybody. I mean, what in the hell would you want this for? And I went outside this Friday, and I got on this bus one more day, and the first thing I did was I sat down in a huge wad of chewing gum. I got it all over the back of my trousers. And it was a disgusting mess. And I got off the bus somewhere around Western Avenue, and I went into a gas station, service station restroom, and I tried to clean the chewing gum off the back of my trousers with wet paper towels. I don't know if you've ever tried to do this with a wool suit, but the gum went all down the legs, and it was just a disgusting mess. And it occurred to me that I was the most grotesque loser. I stood in this John, in this gas station, with my pants in this hand, and wet paper towels in this hand, and, the door opened, and a guy walked in from one of the office buildings, and everybody looked at me, You could see the look in his eyes, like, another L.A. weirdo, And it was just the most, I thought, my God, I don't think it was possible to feel so bad. And I put my pants on, and I went outside, and I got on the bus, and I thought, all I have in me today is maybe I can have a sandwich and go to a movie. So if I can sit in a movie today, just maybe I won't drink. But that's all there is for me today. And so I rode the bus to the end of the line to Santa Monica, right by the beach. And I got off the bus, and I walked through this old mall in Santa Monica, and I went into this cafeteria. And I got a tray, and I went down the line, I got some lunch, and I brought it to a table, and I sat the tray down, and I went outside to get a newspaper, and the busboy came by and took my lunch. Bust the goddamn tray, right? Took my lunch. And I had $6 left, and I walked from Santa Monica to Westwood Village, where the UCLA campus is, to go to the movie. I thought, I'll buy a ticket, I'll sit in the movie, I'll go to a meeting tonight, maybe I won't drink today. That's all I have. I'm quit. I give up. It's over. I have nothing left. I'm not going to ask for a job. They're not going to take me back in medicine. I don't care. I quit. You hear me? It's over. I don't care what happens. I quit. So I stood in that movie line when I quit. And while I was standing there to buy a ticket, I heard a voice in back of me. And I turned around, and I was smack face to face with the administrator of the medical center in which I had been arrested in for stealing narcotics. And he said, "Where in the hell have you been?" And I said, "I'm in AA. And I don't drink, and I certainly don't use drugs, and I'm doing okay, I guess." I got this chewing gum all over my rear end, but aside from that. And he looked at me, and an amazing expression came over his face, and he started to cry. And he put his arms around me, and he told me he loved me. He was so glad to see me. He's so glad I was alive. And he said, "Have you worked?" I said, "I haven't worked for a long time." And he said, "That's amazing." He says, "We have a urologist who's joined our group practice, who's a member of the Medical Quality Assurance Board in the state of California. And he's going to be down in the clinic tomorrow, on Saturday. Please come down. I'm going to introduce you to him. The three of us are going to have lunch. Maybe he can help you. Maybe he can write some letters and get your license back. And if he can, how would you like a job?" Back in that same emergency room. So the next day I went down to that clinic, and I met that urologist, and he wrote some letters. And within 60 days, my medical license was restored in the state of California. I went back to work in the very same emergency room in which I was arrested in for stealing narcotics. I worked there for the following 2.5 years. And during that period of time, no drugs were missing. Not once did I have to answer where the Demerol was. But something more significant at first, and the patients received good care. Good care. I know, I gave it to them. And I took these steps, 1 through 12. I took them. I wrote that inventory, if you're new, that we're going to ask you to write. And you must write it. It is a written inventory. And it is not a psychological exercise, which is another current misnomer in AA. It has nothing to do with the mental health community. It is a spiritual exercise. The purpose of that inventory is, contrary to popular belief, is not to get you in touch with your anger. The purpose of that inventory is to tell us your secrets. That's what it's about. You tell us your secrets, and you'll be free. That's what you'll be. And I wrote that inventory. And I rode with this crazy sponsor when he was making a talk out in the desert somewhere, and I read this inventory by flashlight under the dashboard of his car while he was driving. And when I was done with it, he told me how to take the 6th and the 7th step. And you know how you do that? You do it on your knees. And you ask God to help you. You do not work on character defects. That's God's job. Then you pay the money back. You pay it back. You don't talk about paying it back. You don't decide which amends you should make first. Make them. Pay it back. All of it. Then you help people here. And you help them for free. You go when you're asked and you do what you're told. And I began to do that, and my life flourished. Now, that is not to say, and there's another thing that people, I think new people today especially, believe if you do these things, that your life gets to be some kind of a utopia. You know what I mean? That you never make mistakes, and you live in some blissful existence in AA land. You know. Not true. You know what you get here? You get, the highest you get to be in AA is human being. That's what you get here. Human beings do dreadful things. drunk and sober. Human beings make mistakes. Human beings make a lot of mistakes, drunk or sober. And the great news of AA is, if you're new, the great evangelism here and the promise of AA is that you will never get drunk because you made a mistake. Never. Only if you insist on defending it. But you can make all of them. I've made all of them. I've done everything wrong in sobriety you could do. In 1976, in August, I met a cute little redhead. We met in August, we got married in September, and divorced in October. Yeah. And the last time I saw her, she was on the way to her daddy's ranch in El Dorado, Texas. But I'll tell you what, I didn't drink and I didn't run, and I stayed here, and I got better. It was a dreadful time for me, but I got better. And I did a lot of things. I got out of medicine because it was all nights, and I decided to go to law school. I was going to be a lawyer. I went to law school at night for a while. I went to 2 semesters of law schools. I got A's. I always get A's. And I did a good job. But it occurred to me that I didn't want to be a lawyer. I don't want to worry about who rear-ended who, I mean, I just didn't want to do it. And so I was at loose ends, and I was sober now 5 years, I guess, and I would go into my home group, and I didn't want to be such a flake, so unsuccessful. I didn't have goals. I didn't have I didn't have direction. And so a guy that was in our group was doing some work seemed strange to me. He was in vocational rehabilitation. He was working with people who were industrially injured, and the insurance carriers would hire him to get these people back to work, and it sounded like a dreadful idea to me, but he said, why don't you come down and go to work for this firm that I work for? You know what I did? I decided to do it. You know what the job paid? $1,100 a month. I mean, it was a nothing job. But you know why I took that job? I think it's important. I took that job simply because I did not want to go into my home group one more day and say I wasn't working. It's the only reason. I didn't want to go there. I so badly wanted to be an example. I thought, at least I'll do that. I mean, it's a terrible job, and it won't last very long at all, and I don't like it, but I'll do it just to shut them up. I mean, I want to get the heat off. And so I took that job. Well, that was 10 years ago. I don't work for that firm anymore. I have my own. And I'll tell you, it's a big firm. Big for me. There's my wife and I work there. But I'll tell you what we have. We have a suite of offices on Wilshire Boulevard, oddly enough. And I have a huge picture window and a big antique desk and a big swivel chair. And I swivel that chair around. And I look right down Wilshire Boulevard from the Wilshire Financial Tower where my office is. And on days when I don't think I'm getting what I deserve, when the world is not treating me like it should, you know what I do? I look for the 83 bus. Comes up Wilshire Boulevard. And every time I see it, it occurs to me that I got a hell of a deal. That I'm okay. I'm very successful. I make a lot of money. I have a huge Spanish house in Pasadena, built in 1926. And it's a great house. And I'm married again. And I'm married now for 9 years. And I'm married to a girl who is 13 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's an amazing thing about this marriage. Things that I have learned from this woman, things that I thought were impossible for me to grasp. As a result of this program, we have a relationship that is amazing. We love each other, but more importantly, we like each other. I'd never had that kind of a relationship with a woman. I have learned something innately valuable from this woman. Probably the greatest secret of my life. You know what that is? Some of you newcomer men may be surprised to know this. Women are not the enemy. True story. It is a true story. And our relationship thrives. And our marriage thrives. We love together, we live together, we go to AA together, and we work together. And we have a good life. And I love her more than life itself, with every breath I take. And we have a life that I never imagined I could have. And I have as a matter of fact, I have a brand new Mercedes. And I pull that into parking lots of AA meetings. And when I see a beat up old Chevy, you know what I do? I go to the other side of the lot. I'm willing to bet he doesn't have any insurance. I can't get hit by that jerk. And life is good. I'm a good AA member. And I'm going to sit down. But before I do, I want to tell you, if you're new, why we're here. Because I think that there's I get a sense that we get diluted today. That sometimes we lose sight of our primary purpose, of who we are, our identity. And if you're new, you should know that we are not here because of any mental health innovation. No psychiatric discovery has made this possible. This has nothing to do with psychology or science or medicine. Believe me, if there was an answer to this problem in medicine, I would have found it. I'll tell you. We are here. This is a spiritual program. We're here. I mean, think about it. Here's this stockbroker in a hotel, in the Mayflower Hotel in Akron, Ohio, in June of 1935. A bigger loser you would never have met. I mean, this guy had a spiritual experience, and he was 6 months sober. And as a result of that experience, for 6 months, he had some notion in his head that if he tried to help other drunks, that was some kind of an answer. And so that's what he did. And you know what? He didn't help anybody. I mean, nobody got sober. He was singularly unsuccessful. And they had a proxy fight, and he had an opportunity to go to Akron to participate in this proxy fight, and maybe, just maybe, he'd be able to put his business life back together. So he left his wife in New York, and he went to Akron, Ohio, and you know what they did? They lost the proxy fight, him and his friends. And his friends all went home. And they left him there. He wouldn't quit. He had nowhere to go. There's nothing left for this guy. So he stayed to do battle on a couple more days. And he found himself on a Saturday morning in the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel in Akron, Ohio, a long way from home, terribly depressed, given up, consumed with despair. And I mean, he had no sponsor to call, did he? I mean, there he was. And the cocktail lounge opened, and people went in to drink. And why the hell didn't he go in and get drunk? I mean, that's what he should do. Isn't that what he should do? He ought to get drunk. He ought to go in the cocktail lounge and get drunk. Why would he go to the church directory and start calling ministers? I mean, why would he do that? Would you do that? Not me, Jack. If that's me in that lobby, I'm history. That's what he did. And he finds a woman from the Seiberling family, Henrietta Seiberling, and he's led to by a minister who leads him to a drunken surgeon, and he talks to the surgeon, and boom, that's why we're here. That, my friends, is not science. That's the hand of God. I love New York. Thanks a lot.